Today we're going from Grand Coulee Dam in Northeast Washington to Boundary County Airport in Bonners Ferry, Idaho. Bonners Ferry is in the mountains in a valley, and it's a challenging airport, but it's a beautiful VFR day. And in order to see how the IFR tools can help make our life easier here, let's first consider what a purely VFR plan might look like. A good VFR plan here is probably not the direct route because it's over a bunch of rough terrain. There are no airports along the way. What we might do instead is first follow this road past Wilbur and Davenport and end up at Spokane. From there, we might follow the highway to Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and then the rest of the way in to Boundary County. Then we'd study the sectional, we'd find the maximum elevation figures, look at the contour lines, do what we can to plan safe altitudes for cruise, and then for the descent up the valley to Boundary County. That'll work, but it's more work than necessary. What we're ultimately trying to do is to find a route with a series of minimum safe altitudes that we can fly on the way in. And that's already what an instrument approach does. And Boundary County has an instrument approach. Let's take a look and see what we can borrow from that. So we can tap on the airport here and go to Procedure and then Approach. And you'll see that there is exactly one approach, and it's the RNAV approach to runway 2. It really shouldn't be surprising that there's only one instrument approach here, since the terrain kind of dictates that there's only one way to approach this airport, and it's from the south. Of everything on this chart, what we really care about here is the top-down map view in the middle called the plan view, because that shows routes and minimum altitudes, exactly what we're looking for. For example, between Webda and Jatley, it's 5,200. If we were doing this IFR, there are specific rules for how and where we can legally begin an approach, but since we're VFR and we're just using this as a supplement, any of these published routes are fair game. So we want to figure out what fix or segment would be a convenient spot to join. Let me show you a ForeFlight trick for visualizing which of these routes might be useful. Back on the map view, we can go to Procedure and then choose Approach. This is called the Procedure Advisor. And then let's take a look at the RNAV Runway 2 approach. And you can see each of the published segments of the approach overlaid on our map here with our more tentatively planned route in blue. Carps is really close to Coeur d'Alene where we plan to go anyway. We could potentially pick up the approach at Carps, fly to Hitru, and then on in from there. Let's choose that transition. Now it lets us choose what minimum we're going to fly this approach to. That doesn't really matter in the VFR case. I'm just going to choose the lowest LNAV minimum here, which happens to be 940 feet, MDH's minimum descent height. That's an AGL height. It's approximately pattern altitude. Most of the time, the lowest minimum is much lower than pattern altitude, but for our purposes here, finding the one that's right around pattern altitude is a nice reminder too. And usually that would be the circling minimum. Here, it's the lowest LNAV minimum. And we'll add it to the route. So now what it's done is it's loaded that route into our flight plan in ForeFlight. It's also overlaid the chart on ForeFlight. You'll notice that all of these waypoints line up with where they are on the chart, except for Carps, which is right here on the chart, and all the way down here on the map. And the reason for that is this segment is not depicted to scale on the approach chart. You can see the double jagged line, which indicates that between Carps and Hitru. Actually, though, I don't really want the instrument approach chart overlaid on the sectional. I'd rather see the detail that's on the sectional. So I can hide the approach chart by tapping the settings cogwheel here, and then just hide plate. All the things that I really care about, the routes and the altitudes, are still here even after I've hidden the approach chart. So from Carps, we could descend to 8,600. After Hitru, we could go as low as 5,800 on the way to Webda. After that, 5,200 is the minimum safe altitude here to Jatley. Then 4,540 to Oxdew. And from there, we can just ascend to the pattern. Makes a lot of sense in context. This route just takes us right down the valley with progressively lower altitudes as we get closer to the destination. There's much more on the chart that matters for IFR purposes, but for what we're doing as a supplement and a convenient route planning trick, we've got what we need. But I am going to add it to my plate binder with this button here at the top in ForeFlight. Now, even after I close it, I can see the plate in the binder. I can always jump back to the plates and it's right there for me. What might I want for quick reference? Well, there's a frequency strip at the top that shows the frequencies in a convenient order, the order that I'll probably use them on the way in. There's also a minimum safe altitude. Anywhere within 25 miles of Arhi, 9,000 feet is a safe altitude we could use. At the bottom right, there's an airport sketch that shows, for example, the runway dimensions, the taxiway layout, elevation, the fact that there are pilot-controlled runway lights and that there's a PAPI on the left side of runway 2, but not on runway 20. And then if we wanted, there are also circling minimums, which give us a safe altitude for operating in closer vicinity of the airport. So yes, I could get most of that information from the chart supplement and from the sectional, but sometimes it's nice having all these things in one convenient chart that I can switch over to if I need them at any moment. All right, back on the map, let's clean up the rest of the route. We'll work our way backwards and see if we can improve on this at all. Carps, you'll notice, is right on this blue line of the airway, Victor 120 or 448. So if I swap back over to the IFR low en route chart, what I'm going to do is get rid of Coeur d'Alene as a waypoint here and instead put us on the airway. I'll move this point from the Spokane Airport to the Spokane VOR. And now we have another route and minimum safe altitude. This airway has a minimum obstacle clearance altitude of 7,600 feet, and 9,000 feet is a minimum en route altitude that also provides navigation coverage from the VORs that define the route. I don't particularly care about VOR navigation, but 9,500 is a good eastbound VFR altitude that comfortably clears the terrain. And if it seems a little bit too convenient that our route down the airway happens to join up with an instrument approach, that's kind of the point. These approaches are designed to take you from the safe en route environment all the way down to an airport. And as long as we're planning in reverse, let's just move back to the airport here. Now, the IFR low en route chart shows this airport as brown, which means unlike the green and blue airports on the chart, this one has no IFR procedures, which means there's no departure procedure here either. Fortunately, today we don't really need a departure procedure. It wouldn't help us too much. It's a beautiful VFR day. We can just take off and turn on course. All right, let's go out to the plane. While the engine warms up, let's load the route into the flight plan and the GPS, including the approach procedure at Boundary County. So we've got the departure airport here. I'm going to use 68 Sierra as a checkpoint. Then the Spokane VOR, GEG. I could load an airway here, but it's just the one short segment from Spokane to Carps, so I'm going to manually put Carps in there. After Carps is the instrument approach. I don't want to load those points manually. I want to load the procedure from the database. The easiest way to do that is going to be to put the destination airport in here first, so we have access to its procedures. So we'll go 65 Sierra. And then I'll tap on the airport and go to load procedure. We want an approach. We want the RNAV runway 2 approach. Now we choose the transition that we want to join the approach on. By default, it's vectors, which just draws a line out from the final approach fix, assuming that ATC is going to vector us to it. But we know that we want to start this approach from Carps. So I'll tap transition and Carps. When you load a procedure, it's going to ask you if you want to just load it or if you also want to activate the approach. Loading an approach simply means you want to tack it on to the end of your flight plan. If you said you wanted to activate it, you'd be telling the GPS that not only do you want it in your flight plan, you want to go direct to the first fix on the approach right now. If we chose load approach and activate, we'd be saying, I want to go direct to CARPS right now. Of course, we don't want to do that. We just want it in our flight plan, so I'm going to choose load approach. After you load a procedure, you always want to make sure that it matches what you actually want it to be. And right away here, I can see at a glance that it doesn't, because it has us going from CARPS to the airport and then back out to CARPS again to start an approach. Of course, that's not what we want to do, and we can get away with just deleting the airport here. The GPS is smart enough to remove the duplicate of CARPS, and now we have the Spokane VOR, and then CARPS, and the rest of the waypoints in the approach sequence. Hitchru, Webda, Jatley, Oxdu, and then the missed approach point and the missed approach procedure, which we can ignore for our purposes. There's no destination airport in the flight plan anymore, but the GPS is smart enough here to know that because we've got an instrument approach to Boundary County, that's our destination. And we can have the same access to airport information that we would if the airport were in our flight plan by tapping airport info at the top of the approach. We're crossing Spokane here, and I can see that the GPS has overlaid the plan view portion of the chart on the map here. Now, my preference is actually not to have that on the chart for some of the same reasons that we chose to not have it overlaid on ForeFlight. So I'm going to disable charts on the map, and it just sort of cleans up the display. I still have altitudes on here. There's 8,600 at Hitchru, and the rest of them will populate as we get closer or as I zoom in. We're just crossing CARPS and making the left turn up the valley here. I can visually see the valley that this route is taking us through. And the minimum safe altitude for this segment is this 8,600 at Hitchru. We could descend there now. There's really no need to, though, yet. It's a full 35 miles left to go. We'll be there in 12 minutes. And the GTN 750, which has automatically loaded the approach altitudes with the approach, is telling us we'd only need 80 feet per minute of descent right now to hit these altitudes. So there's no need to descend quite yet. Okay, the GPS says just about 500 feet per minute from here would do the job. I'm going to start down now. Before I start, I'm going to preset an altitude. I know 8,600 is not going to be a problem because I'm going to be there in a minute and a half. So I'm going to go ahead and set the next one as a reminder. I also don't care as much as I would if I were IFR that I hit these altitudes exactly. I know that there's nothing in front of me that I'm going to hit. And here we go on the turn for the next leg. 5,800 is the minimum altitude on this. Alright, we're reaching Webda. We're right around 5,800. Here comes our right turn to head inbound. $5,200 is the next altitude. Now, in IFR, if you're doing this in IMC especially, a good rule is to not reconfigure the airplane past the final approach fix. So to be fully configured by then. It's less important on a VFR arrival like this, but it's still a good habit, I would say, to have the gear down by the time you reach the final approach fix if you're going to use an instrument approach like this. Especially if you're going to land straight in. It's just way too easy to forget if you plan to reconfigure late in the approach. Here I'm going to enter the pattern actually and land on runway 20, but just to establish that habit, I'm going to put the gear down before reaching the final approach fix of Jatley here. So I'm leveling off for a moment to get below the gear speed. I am now. And we'll put the gear down. 1, 2, 3, green lights. I'm not concerned about this minimum altitude anymore here. I can see that I have nothing to hit in front of me. The approach has done its job. And I'm going to put traffic pattern altitude in here now of 3,300. So yeah, we definitely could have flown this arrival purely visually, but having the plan predetermined that we know will work, we have a series of altitudes we know will work, makes this a much more comfortable arrival. And if things went wrong, say the weather turned out worse than we expected, we would have a safety valve of known safe altitudes and courses on the way into this airport.